What's up, Sinisa Superbad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the Relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
What it is, you know there's a lot of political people behind the scenes of boxing. That's what Anthony Joshua is. Anthony Joshua is a political heavyweight champion with a belt he's stolen off my son. Let's have that in.
He didn't.
He was in
The
on it.
IBF stole it.
The IBF stole it.
He didn't
Eddie Hearn
steal
stole it.
anything.
You reckon Klitschko got stripped of that belt?
Never. He had it for 11 years, Billy.
No, he had it.
Yeah, but do you reckon if he would have beat Tyson, do you reckon they would have took that IBF belt?
No.
So why did they do it to Tyson, do you
You're
reckon?
IBF.
I know, yeah, not you. I'm not going to go at you, I'm just saying to the camera.
Yeah,
This violin that Big John Fury likes to play his son. It's a tune we've heard before, and it's a tune that requires some reconciliation, as it wasn't Anthony Joshua's fault or Eddie Hearn's in any capacity at all. What happened to Tyson Fury and his IBF title?
It wasn't.
Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua had absolutely nothing to do with that.
Literally nothing.
Those two guys don't even come into it until 2 fights later. That's right. 2 fights from the time that Tyson Fury won that belt is when Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn arrived on the scene. In November of 2015, Tyson Fury decisioned Vladimir Klitschko and became the IBF champion, among other things. In December, following month of that same year, Tyson Fury was stripped of the IBF title for non-compliance. Tyson Fury was contractually obligated to give Vladimir Klitschko a rematch, and the problem was the IBF already had a mandatory challenger lined up to face the winner of that fight, Vasylev Glaskov. So if you want to be mad at somebody, you can be mad at the IBF for not giving Tyson Fury leniency. You can be mad at Vasylev Glaskov for pushing for a title shot that maybe you don't think he deserved.
Maybe.
But where Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn fit into that picture is beyond me, because they didn't arrive till 2 fights later. So Tyson Fury wins the belt in November of 2015. He is subsequently stripped of it in December of 2015, and the following year,
2016.
January of 2016, a contest is staged for the vacant IBF heavyweight title between Vasylev Glaskov and Charles Martin. Fight goes on, Glaskov injures his leg or his knee or whatever it was. Charles Martin ends up becoming the IBF champion.
That's Anthony Joshua's fault.
The weirdest fucking thing about it is Tyson Fury was actually in attendance for Charles Martin's fight against Glaskov, the fight where Charles Martin became the IBF champion, and Tyson Fury went as far as congratulating him.
The fuck?
I mean, I don't recall Tyson Fury exhibiting quite the same energy, either Tyson Fury or Big John Fury. I don't recall either of them exhibiting the energy they now exhibit for Anthony Joshua way back when with Charles Martin. And Charles Martin was the benefactor of Tyson Fury's situation with the IBF, more so than Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua hadn't even come into it.
No, not yet.
You want to say that Anthony Joshua was a political champion because your son was stripped of the IBF when Anthony Joshua literally had nothing to do with that. It's not Anthony Joshua's fault that Tyson Fury had a mandatory lined up at a time where he's got a 2-fight engagement with Klitschko.
It's his fault?
It's hardly Anthony Joshua's fault. It's not Anthony Joshua's fault that Glaskov hurt his knee and Charles Martin ended up with the belt, and the belt itself ended up on the PBC side of things. That also isn't Anthony Joshua's fault or Eddie Hearn's. Seems to me that if you keep name-dropping that guy, it must be for some other reason, that if you're harboring resentment towards Anthony Joshua, it's not because of anything that happened with the IBF, as he literally had nothing to do with that. So if you want to blame somebody for what happened with that title and your son, you blame Glaskov. You blame Charles Martin. Hell, you blame Al Heyman because Charles Martin was his fighter. He was the benefactor of this situation. But who you don't blame is Anthony Joshua, because he had nothing to do with that. He doesn't come into it until 2 fights later, the following year. There's got to be a reason you're making it his fault that things worked out the way they worked out between your son and the IBF. There's got to be a reason. Maybe Anthony Joshua did steal something from Tyson Fury.
What?
But maybe it wasn't the IBF title. Maybe it was the hearts and minds of the British public. Maybe that's what he stole. Maybe that's why even now, Big John Fury is so resentful towards Anthony Joshua for something that he didn't do.
Never stole anything from your son.
So just can the poor me crap, John, okay?
Get the hell out of here!
Your son's not a victim. He's no more a victim than Jermaine Taylor was when the IBF stripped him of his world title for the same reason they stripped your son of his world title, because Jermaine Taylor, like your son, had a mandatory challenger lined up, the same as your son. Jermaine was supposed to fight Sergio Mora. Jermaine was having some legal trouble, and he was already contracted to face Bernard Hopkins for a second time. As a result of non-compliance with the IBF and satisfying their mandatory challenger in Sergio Mora, he was stripped of the title. I mean, this is the same IBF that wasn't afraid to strip Jermaine Taylor, Gennady Golovkin, and Canelo Alvarez of their IBF title.
They've been doing that shit.
They didn't do anything to your son that they didn't do to them, okay? All those guys were stripped of their IBF titles for the exact same fucking reason. So you can can the poor me crap, John. You don't resent Anthony Joshua for what happened with the IBF. He's got nothing to do with what happened with the IBF. You resent him because he was accepted by the British boxing community in all the ways that your son was not, without mulling over why your son wasn't accepted by the British boxing community. Could inflammatory comments towards certain individuals of a certain denomination have something to do with it?
I'd say so.
So you come to America, you give your image a complete overhaul, and you try to rewrite history. You try to rewrite the past. Deep down inside, both the Furies, Tyson, Big John, they still harbor resentment that Tyson had to come all the way here stateside, completely different country in a completely different continent, to achieve any kind of acceptance, the kind of acceptance that he didn't get on the shores of the United Kingdom. That's why they still harbor that resentment. That's what the real nature of the problem is. You can't hide it. You can't disguise it. It's not Anthony Joshua's fault your son was all wrapped up in some jackpot with a pig farmer who 8 years later says he doesn't even farm pigs. It's not Anthony Joshua's fault. It's not Anthony Joshua's fault that your son decided to walk away from boxing for a time, retire, because according to him, he was mentally unfit. He didn't stick a needle in his ass to get him full of nandrolone or coke in his nose to make him test positive for any of that. He didn't stuff the food in his mouth that saw Tyson Fury become morbidly obese in the subsequent years following that victory over Vladimir Klitschko. None of this is either Anthony Joshua or Eddie Hearn's fault. And at some point, you and your son are going to have to accept personal responsibility, ownership for your actions. Anthony Joshua didn't cost your son the world title, and he ain't got a goddamn fucking thing to do with that.
That's just a smokescreen for why you're really mad.
In super flyweight news, Bob Arum eyes Joshua Franco matchup for Jerwin Ancajas.
This kid Franco who beat Andrew Maloney, he and Ancajas would be a tremendous fight.
Said Arum, the CEO of Top Rank. Franco of San Antonio, Texas, is coming off an upset win over the previously unbeaten Maloney on June 23rd in Las Vegas, dropping him once on Route 2, a unanimous decision. Franco being with Golden Boy Promotions wouldn't be an issue, says Arum.
Golden Boy and ourselves interchange fighters. We did this even before the coronavirus. We have a good relationship with them.
First, both fighters would have to get past their unfinished business elsewhere. Maloney has exercised his rematch clause with Franco for a date to be announced, while Ancajas still has to satisfy a mandatory defense against Jonathan Javier Rodriguez. Ancajas had been scheduled to meet Rodriguez twice, in November and April, before circumstances out of their control nixed the bout. They were scheduled to fight on November 2nd last year when Rodriguez got the visa too late to enter into the country, said MP Promotions president Sean Gibbons. Then, he got the visa, and the pandemic hit, and Jerwin can't get into the country. Ancajas has got his visa approved for now, Gibbons says, before adding, until the embassy opens to get the final stamp, there's no leaving. Ancajas has spent the downtime keeping in shape at his survival camp compound in Imus, Cavite, Philippines, training at low intensity with trainer Joven Jimenez. Ancajas says he's keeping his head straight while he prepares for when he can fly over to the U.S. He watched the Franco-Maloney fight on TV and says Franco impressed him with how well he handled the Australian contender. If we are ever going to fight, I won't let my guard down, said Ancajas. I want to say that for Joshua Franco, this Jerwin Ancajas fight would be a step up from a step up. You know, Andrew Maloney was a step up in competition for Joshua Franco. It was. And if he makes it through that, this is yet another step up. Now, the version of the WBA title that Joshua Franco won from Andrew, that's the lesser version of the title. That's not the full version of it. The full version sits with Roman Gonzalez.
Chocolatita.
Roman is the WBA's full-fledged world champion in the super flyweight division. So don't confuse a potential Joshua Franco versus Jerwin Ancajas fight as a unification fight of any kind. The only full-fledged world title in that match would be Jerwin's IBF title. Let's get that right out of the way. Well, as far as the fight, I like the fight. I think it's just what the doctor ordered, provided the stars align the way they need to make this fight a reality. For Jerwin in particular, who's been having a bit of a quiet reign as IBF champion in the super flyweight division.
He needs a fight like this.
Jerwin won the IBF title from the then IBF champion McJoe Arroyo back in 2016, and since then, he's defended it about 8 times.
That ain't nothing to sneeze at.
But I think that Jerwin needs a fight like this here and now because much of the news coming out of the super flyweight division has involved many of the other champions and what titillating matches are on the horizon for them. You're talking about a rematch between Chocolatito and Juan Francisco Estrada. You're talking about a potential history-making fight between Kosei Tanaka and Kazuto Ioka. I mean, that's what news has been coming out of the super flyweight division as of late. And Jerwin, he seemed a bit like the odd man out, the guy on the outside looking in.
Hasn't really been a part of those conversations.
But make no mistake, since having become a world champion back in 2016, he has defended his title, his version of it, 8 times. That's nothing to sneeze at. What that communicates is that Jerwin is just as formidable as anybody else, and he's one to look out for. Now, this proposition of Ancajas versus Franco is a ways out. I mean, Jerwin's got to get past his mandatory challenger, and Joshua Franco, he's got to settle up with Andrew Maloney at least one more time.
So it's not set in stone.
The takeaway here is that the network relationships are there between the people at Top Rank and the people at Golden Boy, so it is a viable match. It can happen. You can mix and match names sometimes and get a good matchup, but ultimately, whether or not those matchups are even viable is what's important, because we can mix and match names all fucking day.
Yeah.
Counts for nothing if the fights aren't likely to happen, whereas this fight between Jerwin and Joshua, it's actually possible inside of the next 12 months, provided that both of these guys make it through what they've got to make it through, and I think they can. So let's just keep our fingers crossed when it comes to this one, and hopefully inside of a year's time, it'll happen. And finally, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Alexander Vesputin has been stripped of the WBA's regular welterweight belt as he tested positive for ligandrol following his win over Radzav Butaev. The WBA have ordered Yordenis Ugas versus Abel Ramos for the vacant belt, with Butaev mandatory for the winner. One would have thought that they would have just made Ugas versus Butaev and given Butaev another shot at that WBA title, since the shot that he'd already gotten for it was tainted with ligandrol. So how are you guys liking this Ugas versus Abel Ramos fight? You know, Abel Ramos, he's got 3 professional losses. He lost one to Jamal James, he lost one to Ivan Baranchyk, and before that he lost one to Regis Pregarius. He's got a professional record of 26 wins, 20 knockouts, with 3 losses and 2 draws. So Abel, he's been around the block, he's experienced. I mean, that much we can deduce. And in all likelihood, Yordenis Ugas is going to decide to move forward with this, because the hierarchy of thought seems to be that if they pick up this baby belt, this version of the WBA title, it will thereby line them up for a Manny Pacquiao fight,
so to speak.
You know, I talked about this in a previous video, that whether the Ugas people are lining him up for a Manny Pacquiao fight, or they're simply lining him up to catch Manny Pacquiao's belt, either way, the Ugas people seem to be going the WBA route as opposed to the WBO route. And I think the reasoning behind this is that even if they can't get a Manny Pacquiao fight, even if they're not likely to get that match, they still want to be there to receive the full-fledged title, rather be elevated to it if it should become vacant, because that is a legitimate possibility. Manny Pacquiao might be the full-fledged champion, and so long as he's active, he has the kind of marquee value to have things his way. But that is so long as he's active, and here today, he's 41 years old. 1 to 2 fights from now, he could decide to retire. 1 to 2 fights from now, an order might come down from the WBA ordering him to fight Ugas, hypothetically speaking. And in the event that happens, I don't rule out Manny vacating the title.
It's possible.
Manny doesn't know anybody anything. He doesn't have anything to prove to anyone. So there are a lot of different scenarios out there where Manny might come up out of that belt and Ugas, if he's in the right position, might catch it. It's what happens in the mean in-between time, however, that I take issue with. You're looking at a situation where Yordenis Ugas is going to square off against an unheralded welterweight for a baby belt, and if he wins, may have to square off against yet another unheralded welterweight in defense of that baby belt, where he could be pursuing a fight with a more notoriable fighter for a full-fledged version of a world title. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Terence Crawford. If Yordenis Ugas goes through with this 2-fight plan to where he fights Ramos, and if he wins, then he fights Butaev, I'll tell you what, I don't want to hear any more of the Terence Crawford needs to fight this guy, or Terence Crawford needs to fight that guy crap. Because all of these fucking guys, all of these suggestions that Crawford's detractors like to make, they all seem to go the other way when they're on the precipice of actually landing that fight. Because it just so happens, Yordenis Ugas' name was listed as a possible candidate for a Crawford fight. And as soon as that happens, lo and behold,
They find something else to do.
they always seem to find something else to do. And Terence Crawford can hardly be blamed for this. I mean, you got all these fucking elite level welterweights, all these top 10, top 5 guys, and which one of them is asking for a Terence Crawford fight? Which one? I mean, take a look at this. Take a look at this clusterfuck. You got Ugas potentially fighting for a baby belt, not even a full version of a world title, a baby belt. You got that going on. You got Keith Diamond talking about having a rematch with Sean Porter for no belt at all, mind you. And Errol Spence,
That guy.
he's more concerned with fighting Danny Garcia than unifying with Terence Crawford. Admittedly, I was never expecting Errol Spence to fight Terence Crawford right after that car accident, but better still, according to Errol Spence, he's in tip-top shape, no tune-ups, he's a savage, right? Alright, you're such a fucking savage, go fight Terence Crawford then, Mr. Savage. So don't complain to me about Terence Crawford's welterweight resume when all these top-shelf, top-tier fucking welterweights seem to part like a river around a rock when it comes to him. I don't want to hear it.